So today's daf is daf Mem Aleph, and we're talking about chatos hapnimios, those chatos that require hazah and matan domim on the mizbeach hapnimi inside the heichal. And our sugya for today, which is mostly about Rav Papa, we'll get to Rav Papa very shortly, is juggling basically four different categories of chatos hapnimios. And we'll just mention them. The most central of them all, in terms of the parsha in the Torah, is the par helim dover shel tzibur, which is a par chatos that's brought when most of the tzibur violates an isur kares based on an erroneous ruling of the bezdin. And then we're going to have a comparison between the haktoras ha'imurim in the case of par helim dover shel tzibur with Paro Shel Mashiach, and that's a case where the Mashiach, with the Kohen Gadol, was a scholar, and he issued a ruling based on his understanding, in which he himself erroneously violated an Isur Kares, and he has to bring a special par called Kohen Mashiach. Now we're going to have a comparison between Par Shel Mashiach and par helim dover shel tzibur, and then we're going to try to jump over and create another analogy to derive halachas and haktaras heimurim in the case of what's called the sa'ir shel avodas kochavim, where the tzibur violated avodas kochavim based on an erroneous ruling, and they have to bring a sa'ir. And finally, to complete the picture, we're going to have a discussion about the par and the sa'ir of Yom Kippurim, where for sure all the avodos are absolutely critical. So let's start with the top of Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, Shehushvu Ma'asim L'Ma'asim, and the Gemara, based on an analysis of the Brisa on Daf Mem, came to the conclusion that with regard to the Aktoras Imurim, we have an equation between Paro Shel Mashiach and the Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur. And that equation is going to be dependent upon that last category that we mentioned above, which is the special carbon that's brought inside the Kodesh Kadoshim in the Heichal, called the Par Shel Yom Kippurim. Now, the Gemara on Daf Mem, we're sort of picking it up right in the middle of a long, complicated sugya. All these sugyas are about drashos and how to derive derivations from psukim. You really have to have all the prices in front of you and all the psukim in front of you. But in any event, just to try to get through this, because that's the nature of Daf Yomi, you have to, you don't skip, even when you want to. So what happens is that there's something called es badam utvila. So that was the Gemara. I'm just summarizing like the tip of the iceberg from Daf Mem. And the underlying concept that combines those three is how to do the avodas hadam. It has to do with it's not enough as in, let's say, a chatos chitona, where you take the dam in a receptacle and you throw it on the mizbeach. Here in the chatos pnimios, the Torah requires a dipping of the finger, which is called tfilas etzba of the Kohen, and then he dips his finger in the dam and then applies it over to the mizbeach. In this case, the mizbeach hazov, the mizbeach hapnimim. So if we move on in the Gemara says, "Vi also le par Yom Kippurim le'es badam utvila vi par Kohen Mashiach." So it seems that the source, again, if we go through the psukim for these halachos of how exactly to do the matan domim through the tvila and it also has to do with the laws of chatzitza, which are in Daf Mem, that even if, let's say, the Kohen has a blister on his finger, and you would have said that that makes a chatzitza between his finger and the dam that's in the mizrak, in the receptacle, nevertheless, the Torah teaches us no, that's not considered a chatzitza, and therefore the application of the dam is kosher, it's valid. So that's as far as an equation between Par Kohen Moshiach and Par Yom Kippurim. And that equation is going to come up over and over again in the Sugya. But now we have the Osile Seir Yom Kippurim. Now, on Yom Kippurim, that unique avoda of the Kodesh Kadoshim plus the Heichal and the Matonos on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, that applies not only to the Par, but also to the Soyer, which are two korbanos that have identical hazoyos inside the Kodesh, inside the Heichal and the Kodesh Kadoshim, and then the blood of the Soyer and the blood of the Par are mixed together by the Kohen Gadol in one kli, and then he applies that to the four corners of the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And that's going to be derived from Miseiri Avodas Kochavim with a Kal V'chomer. Okay, now that Kal V'chomer was discussed at great length. We're not going to go through it again, but be that as it may, from the famous Sa'ir of Avodah Zarah, we're going to derive the dinim of the Sa'ir of Yom Kippurim, because both Sa'irim are what we call Chatos Pnimios. And based on a Kal V'chomer, we're going to derive the conclusion that those laws that are applicable to Seirei Avodas Kochavim, which are in turn derived from Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, which is in turn derived from the Chatas of Kohen Moshiach, and therefore we're going to finally derive conclusions about the Seirim, or about, the Sa'ir of Yom Kippurim from the Seirim of Avodas Kochavim. Now, there's a little bit of a mistake, so to speak, in the text here. It shouldn't say Se'ire, which is in the plural. There's only one Sa'ir for the entire Tzibur if they violate Avodas Kochavim. So now the Gemara wants to know what's going on over here. So just as a background, again, this is back on Daf Mem. In the Parsha of Bar Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, there was a pasuk that's in Vayikra Dalid that is quite long, and each word has to be subject to a derivation. So just to quote the pasuk, I'm looking here in the Torah Or on the side of the Gemara. It says, "V'asal apar kasher asal aparachatos v'chein yasel lo." Now the words "v'chein yasel lo" would seem to apply to the Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, because that's the parsha of Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur. But then the first part of the pasuk, "V'asal apar." Kasher asal apar is what we call in logic a tautology. You're just repeating A equals A. Asal apar, kasher asal apar. So the answer to that question is going to come as an answer to the following objection of the Gemara. V'chi dover alomi mehekesh chozer malamed b'kal v'chomer. We have very strict rules that apply to deriving halachas in kodshim. And one of those rules is that if you derive something from a hekesh, you can't go back then and derive from that which is derived in a hekesh a kal v'chomer. And therefore we have a problem if we want to derive se'ir avodas kochavim in a kal v'chomer from se'ir Yom Kippurim, and the se'ir of Yom Kippurim is itself derived from a hekesh. How do we do that? And here's where we introduce what I call the main player of today, the main actor on the stage, and that's Rav Papa. Amar Rav Papa, kasavar tana de Rabbi Shmuel. This particular brisa reflects the Tana de Bei Rabbi Shmuel. So there were many different brisos and sifris and sifras and so forth. There was a whole group of brisos that were organized by Rabbi Shmuel in his Beis Medrash. And it happens to be that we lucked out over here because Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion that Dover Lovim Behekesh Choser Malame B'Kal V'Chomer. Now, you have to understand, there are two different rules that sound very, very similar, but the Gemara is making a distinction, one fundamentally, one from the other. The rule that we're attacking now is Dover Alomed Behekesh, Eino Choser Umalamed B'Kal V'Chomer, until we get to Rabbi Shmuel. The other rule, which limits your ability to derive halachos, is a rule that even Rabbi Shmuel accepted. And what is that rule? Dover halomed behekesh, eino choser v'lomed behekesh. So if you have a first hekesh and you derive B from A in the first hekesh, and now you have a second hekesh in which you want to derive C from B, it's a no-go. You can't do such a thing in Kodesh. And therefore, the Gemara now is going to come up with a whole new explanation to answer the question that we started with. What was the asol par, kasher asol par? Do to the par what you do to the par. I mean, what are you trying to tell me?
Right.
So the Gemara says, Ze par helim dover shel tzibur. So that extra word lapar is referring to the par helim dover shel tzibur. Well, wait a minute. Says the Gemara, habit tzibur gufei ksiv. If not for Rav Papa, we don't understand. How can you tell me that the Torah adds the word lapar to tell you something about the par helim dover shel tzibur, and therefore it repeats the asal lapar kasher asal lapar, when the asal lapar itself is referring to par helim dover shel tzibur? And on that we have Rav Papa. Rav Papa mishum deboileg mure par helim dover shel tzibur bioseres ushtei kloyos l'seire avodas kol chavim. So here's how it works. We have nothing in the parsha of par helim dover shel tzibur to shed a light on the details of the Haktoras Haimurim, what was burnt on the Mizbeach in the case of the par helim dover shel tzibur. The answer to that question, which has to do with Yoseres, which Shtei Kloyos and Yoseres code, that comes from Paro Shel Mashiach. So we have Hekesh number one. Again, if we had a whiteboard, we'd write this on the whiteboard. You have Hekesh number one from Par Kohen Mashiach over to Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur. Now, when we get to the Sa'ir, and we want to derive conclusions about Haktoras Shtei Akloyos V'Yoseres HaKovod in the Sa'ir, let's say the Sa'ir of Yom Kippurim, we're going to have to derive that from the Hekesh from Sa'ir Yom Kippurim to Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur. So in other words, you're going to need now a second Hekesh. It's like, I think we called it when I was a kid, the law of commutation. I think, you commute one halacha from A to B, and then from B, you commute a halacha and derive it to C. But we can't do that. That's a technical foul. Again, I don't know what it's called in hockey, but in basketball, it's called a technical foul. And in Kodshim, it doesn't go. Therefore, Amar Papa, if we want to derive from Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, as far as Haktoras Yoseres HaKovod Shtei Akloyos, right? The Yoseres HaKovod is called the diaphragm in English, and the Shtei Akloyos are the two kidneys. Then we're going to derive that from Paro Shel Mashiach, in that original Hekesh that we spoke about between Paro Shel Mashiach and Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur. But now we want to go ahead and derive the Haktorah of Yoseres HaKovod and Shtei Akloyos from Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur over to Seir Avodah Zarah, Upar Helim Dover Shel Tzibur Begufei Lo Ksiv. If you're telling me that the requirement of Haktorah, excuse me, if I call it Yoseres HaKovod, you'll know what I mean, right? In the case of Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur is derived from Kohen Mashiach. How can we now make that next leap of faith from Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur over to Seir Avodah Zarah? Vekesha Asi. It's only derived in a Hekesh. So you've started with one Hekesh, and now you're building, you're piggybacking a second Hekesh on the first. You can't do that. And therefore, now we have an answer to the question why the Torah added the word par. Itzrich par, lemehevi keman dechsiv bebegufe v'lo lehevi dover halomed vehekesh v'chosim lamehekesh. Where the extra par tells me that that which we derived from the Hekesh of Kohen Moshiach, namely the Haktorah of Yoser Sakovin and Shtei Kloyos, that's written, Kaviyachol, explicitly in the parsha of Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur. And that which is explicit in the parsha can now be a springboard from which we can derive by analogy, in this particular case, So'ir Shel Avodas Kochav. And we move on. Tanya Kavasi de Rav Papa. The Gemara is absolutely thrilled with Rav Papa, which answers the question about the extra word lapar, and quotes a brisa to support Rav Papa. Now keep in mind that at the beginning of that pasuk in Vayikra Dalet in the parish of Helim David Parhem Shalom is va'asal apar kasher asal apar, and it says kasher asa kain yasalo towards the end of the pasuk kain yasalo. So you have the asa kasher asa. So this pasuk now in the brisa is going to be taken apart piece by piece. And every phrase, every word in the parasha is going to teach me another halach. So we start with the asa kasher asa, and from that we're going to derive that the Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur requires whatever it requires. Do whatever you have to do with the Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur. Then it says lapar matam lo lapar up. Lefish and Emor, it says, with regard to Sa'ir of Avodas Kochavim, Vehem hevi es karbonom ishel Hashem. And I think he's only quoting part of the pasuk, but afterwards it says v'chatasam lifnei Hashem al shigagasam. This is a pasuk I think we recite on Ma'ariv of Kol Nidri night. Anyway. So chatasam elu seirei avodas kochav. So we now have in the parsha of Par Helim Davar Shavar a reference to seirei avodas kochav. Then the pasuk says, and again this pasuk is in Bamidbar Tesvav. I think it's Parsha Shlach, if I'm not mistaken. Shigagasam ze Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur. So now in the parsha of Seir Avodas Kochavim, we now have a reference to the Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur, which is going to allow me to make a jump and a hekesh, an analogy between Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur and Seir Avodas Kochavim. And then it says, Chatosom al Shigagasam. What does that mean, al Shigagasam? Omra Torah Chatosom Harehi Lecha Kil Shigagasam. That their chatos, meaning the chatos for this sa'ir of avodas kochavim, in a case where the community violated avodas kochavim, it should be considered like something that was unintentional, another carbon that's brought for an unintentional communal sin, and that's going to be a reference to Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur. What are we going to derive from this hekesh? Between Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur and Seir Avodas Kochavim, we're going to derive the Haktorah of the Yoser Sakovin and the Shtei Kloyos. Shigigasam mehechon lamadnu. I don't get it, says the Brisa. You want to derive halacha from the Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur. Where do you know that the Torah doesn't say a word in the parasha of Par Helim Shel Tzibur about Yoseres HaKoved and what you need for Haktoras Imurim? Lo be'Akesha. This is a rhetorical question. Isn't it so that we have to learn it from Akesha to the Par Shel Mashiach, Shel Kohen Mashiach? How are you now going to derive Seir Avodas Kochavim from a Hekesh to Paralel Dover Shel Tzibur when it says nothing in Paralel Shel? All we know about Paralel Shel is derived from a Hekesh to what? To Paro Shel Mashiach. Talmud Loma Lapar. This is exactly what Rav Papa was saying. That the extra word Lapar in the parsha of Helim Dover Shel Tzibur in Vayikra Dalid, Zepar Helim Dover Shel Tzibur. Lapar Zepar Kohen Mashiach. So we have now a explicit reference to that hakrava, I should call it haktorah, of Yoseres HaKoved and Shtei Klayos from Kohen Mashiach Mulchama. We have it now in the parsha of Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, and therefore we can extend it now through the Hekesh to the Soyer of Avodas Kochavim. Omar Mar. Now the Gemara goes back to the Brisa. It says a whole bunch of Brisas here, but anyway, Chatosam, this last Brisa that we had, Elu Seiri Avodas Kochavim, because a chet is always something that's done b'shgaga, and here we're talking about a community that violated the Avodas Kochavim in a shgaga situation. That's Chatosam, and they have to bring a Sa'ir. And we're going to establish a hekesh between the Soyer of Avodas Kochavim and the par of Helim Dover Shel Tzibur. And that's why we're going to have to know that in the case of the Soyer of Avodas Kochavim, you have to burn not only the regular Iburim, you have to add to that the Yoseres HaKoved and the Shtei Klayos. Tepukle Mikra Kama. I don't get it. Why do you need this whole rigmarole with one hekesh, another hekesh? It's explicit, lapar. I don't need it. I don't need it at all. Because the pasuk itself is talking about par helim dover shel tzibur. And in that pasuk, Omar Mar, chatos l'rabos, or leave out l'rabos, elu se'iri avodas kochavim. So we see that in the pasuk of the par helim dover shel tzibur, there's mention of the Soyer of Avodas Kochavim, and that's in the word Chatosam. So if this pasuk has the hekesh between Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur and the Soyer of Avodas Kochavim, and now we know that anything that applies to the Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur should be extended and applied to the Soyer of Avodas Kochavim, why do you need another hekesh to teach you about the haktorah of the Shtei Klayos and Yoseres HaKoved? Rav Papa again. Rav Papa comes back to shed a light on the sugya. It's Rav Salka dat kamina hani mili hazos dichsivan begufe. Right, we had a hekesh from Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur to Sa'ir of Avodah Zarah. Is maybe that applies only to the Hazoyas Adam and to the Haktoras Hachalovim, because that's what it says in the pasuk itself.